Thomas sat at the head of the long oak dining table, his hands clasped tightly around a steaming mug of coffee. The room was bathed in early morning sunlight, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within him. Across from him, Lisa lounged lazily, scrolling through her phone, her blonde hair catching the light like a halo. A cruel irony, he thought. "You've changed," Lisa said abruptly, her voice dripping with disdain. "You used to be fun, spontaneous. Now you're just boring." Thomas's grip on the mug tightened, his knuckles whitening. "Boring?" he echoed, his voice calm but edged with hurt. He searched her face for any sign of the woman he married, the woman who once found joy in their quiet life together. But all he saw was indifference. Lisa set her phone down and leaned back in her chair. "I need more than this, Thomas. I need excitement, passion. You've become predictable, comfortable." She spat the last word like it was poison. The words hit him like a slap, but Thomas maintained his composure. "Is that what you think this is? Comfort?" he asked softly, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions churning inside. Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she stood, smoothing her designer dress with deliberate care. "I'm going out," she announced. "Don't wait up." As the front door closed behind her, the echo lingered in the house longer than it should have. Thomas remained seated, staring at the untouched coffee in his hands. He had noticed the signs for months: the late-night texts, the sudden gym membership, the overabundance of work events. But hearing it spoken aloud shattered any illusions he had clung to. The next week unfolded like a slow, mashing nightmare. Lisa's disdain turned into outright dismissal. She stopped coming home for dinner, stopped pretending to care about the life they had built together, and then, one evening, she delivered the final blow. "I'm leaving," she said matter-of-factly, tossing her suitcase into the trunk of her car. "Jake makes me feel alive in a way you never could." Thomas stood motionless on the driveway, watching as she climbed into Jake's car. The man was everything Thomas wasn't: flashy, arrogant, and oozing with self-confidence. Jake shot Thomas a smirk before revving the engine, the sound tearing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. As the taillights disappeared into the distance, Thomas let out a slow breath. His heart was shattered, yes, but behind the hurt, a seed of resolve was beginning to sprout. Lisa thought she was leaving him powerless, broken. She had no idea who she was underestimating. Later that night, Thomas sat in his home office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his determined expression. He opened a secure folder on his desktop labeled Contingency Plan. He had always been meticulous, methodical, prepared. And now it was time to put those qualities to use. Lisa wanted excitement? Fine. Thomas would give her something unforgettable, but it wouldn't be the thrill she was expecting. The days after Lisa's departure passed in a haze, but Thomas refused to let the fog of heartbreak consume him. Instead, he poured his energy into crafting a meticulous plan, one that would leave Lisa and Jake reeling from the weight of their choices. As he sat at his desk, the numbers on the spreadsheet in front of him solidified into a clear strategy. Thomas had always been the planner in their marriage, quietly managing their finances while Lisa focused on indulgent vacations and shopping sprees. He'd never questioned her whims before. After all, what was a $500 handbag or an all-inclusive spa weekend when they were living comfortably? Now, though, those same luxuries felt like taunts, proof of how little Lisa had appreciated the stability he had worked so hard to provide. It was time to show her the consequences of taking his efforts for granted. Thomas's first move was subtle but effective. He drained their joint savings account, leaving just enough to avoid raising immediate suspicion. Over the years, he had quietly funneled a portion of their income into a private account, one Lisa had never known about. While she had been enjoying the fruits of his labor, he had been securing his future. And now, that decision was paying off. With the click of a mouse, Lisa's financial safety net was gone. Next, he called their financial advisor to request a freeze on her access to other assets. "Just a precaution," he said smoothly, masking the turmoil beneath his calm demeanor. "We're undergoing some changes, and I want to make sure everything is secure." The advisor didn't question him. After all, Thomas had always been the responsible one. But the financial maneuvers were only the beginning. Thomas knew Lisa prided herself on appearances, on being the glamorous, envied wife in their social circle. Her reputation was her armor, and he intended to strip it away piece by piece. He started by planting the seeds of doubt. Quietly, he reached out to a few close friends and colleagues, casually mentioning Lisa's sudden departure and her affair with Jake. He didn't speak with malice. just with an air of wounded honesty that made people instinctively side with him. "It's been tough," he admitted to one of their mutual friends over coffee. "I thought we had built something real, but I guess she needed more than I could give." The whispers began to spread, carried by the same people who had once sung Lisa's praises. Soon her social circle was abuzz with speculation and judgment. Thomas didn't revel in the gossip. It wasn't about petty revenge. It was about making sure Lisa's actions didn't go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Lisa's new life with Jake was already beginning to lose its luster. Thomas had expected as much. Jake, for all his charm, was as shallow as a puddle. He thrived on superficial pleasures and had little patience for anything that required real effort. The cracks in their relationship began to show when Lisa discovered that Jake wasn't the provider she had imagined. The flashy car, the designer wardrobe, it was all a facade, sustained by credit cards and bravado. When the bills started piling up, Jake's temper flared. "You said you wanted excitement," he snapped one evening when Lisa complained about their financial struggles. "Well, this is what excitement looks like." Lisa tried to reach out to Thomas, hoping for some semblance of stability. She called him late one night, her voice trembling. "Thomas, But he cut her off with chilling precision. "Lisa, I'm done cleaning up your messes," he said. "You made your choice. Now live with it." The conversation left her reeling. For the first time, Lisa felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. The man she had dismissed as boring was no longer the safety net she could fall back on. As she sat alone in the cramped apartment she now shared with Jake, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully curated world was crumbling around her. The life she had traded for excitement now felt hollow, and the man she had betrayed was proving far stronger than she had ever given him credit for. Lisa woke up to the sound of Jake arguing with someone on the phone. His deep voice, usually so confident and smooth, was tinged with frustration and panic. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake off the headache that had become all too familiar lately. Sleep didn't come easily in their new apartment. It was cramped, noisy, and lacked the warmth of the suburban home she had left behind. She hadn't noticed these flaws at first. Her excitement about starting fresh with Jake had blinded her, but now reality was setting in. "You think I can just pull money out of thin air?" Jake snapped into the phone, his words sharp enough to cut. Lisa leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake shot her a glare before turning his back. "Nothing you need to worry about," he muttered. But Lisa knew better. She had noticed the eviction notice tucked under a pile of unopened mail on the counter. She had also seen the maxed-out credit card statements Jake tried to hide. Later that day, when Jake stormed out of the apartment to figure things out, Lisa found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where her savings used to be. She had tried to call the bank the week before, hoping to withdraw enough money to cover their mounting expenses, only to be met with a horrifying revelation. The account was nearly empty. "Your husband transferred most of the funds a month ago," the banker had explained, her tone apologetic but firm. Lisa's heart had plummeted. She hadn't even thought to check the account before she left. Why would she? Thomas had always been the responsible one, the caretaker. She assumed the money would always be there. Thomas. She thought of him more often than she cared to admit. Not the quiet, dependable man she had taken for granted, but the version of him she had seen in their last conversation. Cold, distant, unyielding. It was a side of him she had never known existed, and it terrified her. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her thoughts. She picked it up, expecting another collection notice or some desperate message from Jake. Instead, it was a text from her old friend Julia. "Did you see what Thomas posted on Facebook?" Lisa's stomach tightened. She quickly opened the app, her fingers trembling. On Thomas's profile, she found a picture of him standing in front of their old house, now sold, holding the deed. The caption read, "A new chapter begins. Grateful for the lessons and ready for what's next." The comment section was flooded with messages of support and admiration. Beneath the photo was another post, this one with a group of mutual friends gathered at what looked like a cozy dinner party. Thomas stood in the center, smiling warmly, his arm around a striking woman Lisa didn't recognize. They looked happy, at ease. Lisa's heart twisted in her chest. She hadn't expected him to move on so quickly, or at all. In her mind, he was supposed to be grieving her loss, stuck in the limbo she now found herself in. Instead, he was thriving. The realization hit her like a freight train. She had underestimated him, and now she was the one left behind. But Thomas's revenge wasn't limited to quiet dignity. Lisa soon discovered that her social circle, once a source of comfort and validation, had turned icy. Friends who had once eagerly invited her to lunch or confided in her were now distant, their conversations filled with awkward silences and polite smiles. At first, Lisa chalked it up to jealousy, but then came the whispers. Subtle at first, then louder and more pointed. People knew about Jake, about her leaving Thomas, about how she had thrown away a good man for a fleeting thrill. It wasn't just her reputation that was crumbling, it was her entire identity. One evening, desperate for an escape, Lisa decided to attend a networking event hosted by one of her former colleagues. She spent hours getting ready, trying to recapture the confidence she once wore like armor. But as soon as she walked into the room, the judgment was palpable. "Lisa," one woman said, her smile thin and strained. "I heard you've been going through some changes." Lisa forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. She spent the evening dodging subtle digs and side eyes, the humiliation burning brighter with every passing minute. When she finally escaped to the restroom, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her makeup was flawless, her dress elegant, but her eyes looked tired, haunted. Back at the apartment, she found Jake sitting on the couch, beer in hand, watching a game. He didn't look up as she walked in. "How was it?" he asked, his tone indifferent. Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she locked herself in the bathroom and sank to the floor. She had thought she was trading up, moving toward a life of excitement and freedom, but now all she felt was emptiness. As she sat there, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her, she realized something else. Thomas hadn't just taken her money. He had taken back his power. And in doing so, he had left her with nothing. Not even the illusion of control she once clung to so tightly. And yet, the hardest pill to swallow wasn't what she had lost. It was the gnawing realization that she had thrown it all away with her own hands. Lisa sat at the edge of her bed, staring blankly at the cracked ceiling of the apartment. It had been weeks since she last felt any semblance of control over her life. Jake was gone. His promises of excitement and a better life crumbled as quickly as his finances. He'd left her with nothing but an unpaid stack of bills, a broken lease, and the lingering stench of his cologne. In the absence of Jake, the silence in the apartment was deafening. Lisa had always thought she thrived on freedom, on the ability to chase what she wanted without compromise. Now, her so-called freedom felt like a cage. She picked up her phone, mulling mindlessly through photos of her old life, the dinners, the vacation. She tapped on Thomas's profile once more. It had become a habit she hated but couldn't stop. The latest post caught her eye, a photo of him standing by a waterfront park, dressed in casual but crisp clothing, his arm draped over the shoulder of the same striking woman from the dinner party photo. They looked relaxed, laughing at something out of frame. The caption read, "Sometimes, letting go of the past is the only way to make room for a brighter future." Lisa's stomach churned. She didn't know if it was jealousy, regret, or both, but the sight of Thomas moving forward with such ease made her feel as if she were sinking into quicksand. She thought back to the night she left him, smugly assuming that his life would crumble in her absence. Instead, it seemed she had underestimated him at every turn. Desperation gnawed at her. She had tried calling Thomas several times over the last few weeks, but he hadn't picked up. She had left voicemails, apologies, pleas, even a few angry accusations. But his silence was unrelenting. It was as though he had erased her from his life. And that evening, Lisa decided to visit the one place that still felt familiar, the neighborhood cafe where she and Thomas used to meet for breakfast every Sunday. She arrived early, her stomach nodding as she walked through the door. The warm smell of coffee and pastries brought back a flood of memories. She ordered a latte and sat in their usual corner booth, her fingers tracing the wood grain of the table, curling her hands into the warm things. Minutes turned into hours. Lisa stared out the window, hoping against hope that Thomas might walk through the door, as if by some cosmic coincidence. But as the cafe began to empty, she realized he wasn't coming. A wave of humiliation washed over her. What had she expected? That he would magically appear and beg her to come back? That she could fix everything with a tearful apology? As she left the cafe, the weight of her choices pressed down on her like never before. She had spent so long convincing herself that she deserved more, that Thomas wasn't enough. But now the truth was undeniable. She had destroyed the life she had taken for granted, and there was no going back. A week later, Lisa finally mustered the courage to confront Thomas directly. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that exuded a mix of humility and sophistication. When she pulled up to his new townhouse, her palms were sweaty, her breath shallow. She rang the doorbell, her heart pounding in her chest. When the door opened, she was momentarily speechless. Thomas looked better than ever, confident, composed, and utterly indifferent to her presence. The woman from the photos appeared behind him, a gentle hand resting on his arm. "Lisa," Thomas said, his tone polite but distant, "what are you doing here?" Lisa swallowed hard, her carefully rehearsed speech suddenly evaporating. "Thomas, I needed to see you," she stammered. "I've made a mistake. I was wrong to leave, and I miss us." Thomas studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. "Lisa, I think we both know this conversation is pointless. You didn't just leave. You burned every bridge between us. You wanted excitement, and now you have it." "But," she began, her voice breaking. "No," he interrupted, his voice firm but calm. "You made your choice, and I've made mine. I've moved on, Lisa. I hope you can too." Lisa's gaze darted to the woman standing beside him, her stomach twisting with resentment. "So, this is what it's about?" she snapped, unable to hide the bitterness in her tone. "You replaced me so easily?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about her. It's about you. You treated me like I was disposable, like everything I built for us didn't matter. You don't get to waltz back in when things don't work out." For the first time in weeks, Lisa felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the weight of her guilt was too heavy. She had no words to justify what she had done. Thomas gave her one last look, a mixture of pity and finality in his eyes. "Goodbye, Lisa." The door closed softly but firmly, leaving Lisa standing alone on the doorstep. For a long moment, she didn't move. When she finally turned and walked back to her car, the reality of her situation hit her with brutal clarity. She had gambled everything: her marriage, her stability, her dignity, and lost. As she drove back to her empty apartment, Lisa realized that her worst fear had come true. She was truly alone, with no one to blame but herself. Lisa sat in her dimly lit apartment, the shadows on the walls echoing the emptiness in her heart. It had been 2 months since she stood on Thomas's doorstep, her plea for reconciliation firmly rejected. The encounter had been the final nail in the coffin of her former life. She had spent the weeks since replaying their last conversation, dissecting every word, every glance, every expression, and every time the result was the same. She had no one to blame but herself. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, jolting her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was another payment reminder for the overdue rent. With Jake gone and no savings to her name, she was living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had left Thomas for a life of excitement and freedom, only to find herself shackled by debt and regret. In a rare moment of clarity, Lisa decided that she couldn't continue like this. For too long, she had wallowed in self-pity, blaming external circumstances for the mess she had created. If there was any hope of rebuilding her life, she needed to take responsibility and start anew. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only path forward. The next morning, Lisa woke up early and began making a plan. The first step was finding a stable job. While she had previously relied on Thomas's income to sustain her lifestyle, she now realized she had to stand on her own 2 feet. She dusted off her resume, updating it with her years of experience in event planning, and started applying to every job she could find. Her initial attempts were met with silence or rejection, but she refused to give up. Eventually, she landed a position as an assistant at a small events company. The pay was modest, but it was a start. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of pride in herself. It wasn't much, but it was hers. As she settled into her new routine, Lisa began to reflect on the person she had become. She couldn't deny that her choices had been driven by selfishness and arrogance. She had treated Thomas like a stepping stone, dismissing his quiet strength and steady love as weaknesses, but now she saw those qualities for what they truly were: the foundation of a good life. So, Lisa also realized that she had been chasing an illusion. The excitement and passion she had sought with Jake had been fleeting, a superficial thrill that masked the emptiness inside her. True happiness, she now understood, didn't come from external validation or reckless pursuits. It came from within, from self-respect, gratitude, and the ability to appreciate what you have. One weekend, Lisa sat down to write Thomas a letter. She knew he would never take her back, but she wanted to apologize, genuinely, without expecting anything in return. She poured her heart onto the page, acknowledging her mistakes and expressing her gratitude for the years they had shared. Thomas, she wrote, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I took you for granted, and I made choices that hurt you deeply. You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you find the happiness you deserve, and I hope I can find the strength to become someone who can say the same about herself. She mailed the letter the next day, knowing it might never be read, but just writing it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Over time, Lisa began to rebuild. She downsized to an even smaller apartment and started budgeting carefully. She reconnected with old friends, not the ones who had encouraged her reckless behavior, but those who had genuinely cared about her. Slowly but surely, she began to piece her life back together. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Lisa saw a couple sitting on a bench laughing and sharing a coffee. The sight filled her with a pang of longing, but it wasn't accompanied by the bitterness she had felt before. Instead, it was a quiet reminder of what she had lost and what she could strive to find again, if she stayed true to the lessons she had learned. Lisa knew she couldn't undo the past, but she could shape her future. And while the road ahead was uncertain, she resolved to walk it with humility and courage. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope, a small but steady flame that she vowed to nurture, one step at a time.